Most men find out their wife is done with them when the divorce papers show up. I found out from a contractor standing in a storm cellar I'd forgotten we owned, sending me a text message that didn't make a lick of sense. By the time it did make sense, my name was already signed to things I'd never touched, and a woman I'd never met was missing because of me. My name is Howard Kessler. I'm 64 years old. I taught high school shop for 31 years before I hung it up, and now I build furniture in my garage that nobody asks me to build and fix lawnmowers for half the neighborhood. I live in a brick ranch on the south side of Tulsa, the kind of street where everybody knows whose dog is whose. Up until about 3 weeks ago, I'd have told you flat out that I was a contented man. I had a paid-off house, a workshop, a recliner that fit me like a glove, and a wife I figured I'd grow old and die next to. We'll get to her. But before I go any further, do me one small favor. Hit that subscribe button. I know most folks listen all the way through and never bother, and I get it, but it's free and it tells the algorithm somebody's out here paying attention. Tap the like button too, and when you're done, tell me in the comments what you'd have done in my shoes. Stick around. This one's worth it. So, my wife. Her name's Sylvia, and we were married 19 years, together for 22 before the wheels came off. She liked her crossword and pen, gospel radio on Sunday mornings, and one of those true crime shows where the husband always did it, which, looking back, ought to have been a flashing red light I could have seen from space. She drank her coffee black with a half a packet of sweetener. Never the whole packet, always the half. I knew that woman. I knew every habit she had. Or I thought I did. This all kicked off on a Wednesday in late October, right after the first cold snap of the year. Sylvia had driven up to Wichita to help her friend pack up a house. The friend was supposedly moving, downsizing, whatever, and she'd been gone 4 days. I was living the bachelor dream. Cold cereal for supper, ball game on the TV, hadn't shaved since Monday. Real high living. The trouble started when I went out back to throw a tarp over the firewood and noticed water pooling around the old storm cellar at the corner of the lot. That cellar had been there since before we bought the place. Concrete box dug into the ground, steel hatch on top, the kind half of Oklahoma has on account of the tornadoes. We never used it. Sylvia kept some shelving down there, said it was good for storing the canning jars and the Christmas bins, and I hadn't climbed down into that hole in I don't know how many years. The recent rain had cracked the seal around the hatch, so I called the first foundation outfit that popped up on my phone. Fellow named Wade showed up inside the hour. Tomlin Foundation and Concrete. Big quiet guy, work boots worn down to the steel, smelled like cigarettes and cold air. Give me a few to look it over, Wade said, and climbed down the ladder with a flashlight. I went back inside, made myself a sandwich, and turned the game back up. Maybe 10 minutes go by. Then my phone buzzes on the counter. Text from Wade, who I'd just watched go underground in my own backyard. Mr. Kessler, there's a second door down here behind your shelving. It's got locks on it. Who's down here? I laughed out loud. I actually did. I typed back, Wade, partner, there's no second door, just the cellar. 3 dots. Then, sir, the padlocks are on the outside and I can hear somebody breathing in there. I set the sandwich down. Padlocks on the outside. I want you to sit with that the way I didn't, not right away. A lock on the outside of a door doesn't keep anybody out. It keeps whatever's inside from getting out. That's not a lock. That's a cage. I was across that backyard and down that ladder in about 15 seconds. Wade was standing in front of the metal shelving Sylvia kept down there, the heavy stuff loaded with canning jars, and the whole unit had been pulled an inch off the concrete wall. Behind it was a door, a plain hollow door painted the same dull gray as the cellar wall, so flush against the back that in all those years you'd never have known it was there if the shelves sat tight against it, which they always had. 4 padlocks, 4 separate hasps, hardware store cheap but solid, and from behind that door, faint and steady, the sound of somebody breathing slow. Call the police, I told Wade. Already on it, he said. 2 units rolled up in under 10 minutes. I stood in my own backyard feeling like a trespasser while a young officer cut the locks off one by one with a bolt cutter. The whole time I'm texting Sylvia, hey, you need to call me, something's going on at the house. And getting nothing back. She's probably at supper with her friend, I told myself. I needed to tell myself something. The last lock dropped. The door swung in, empty. Not just empty, wiped clean. Bare concrete swept, a single bulb screwed into the ceiling that wasn't even turned on. In the corner sat a little Bluetooth speaker, and when the officer picked it up, he said it was still warm. Next to it, balanced on an overturned bucket, a cheap prepaid phone with the screen spiderwebbed. The breathing had been a recording, playing on a loop, set off by somebody who wasn't there. The young officer turned the prepaid phone over in his gloved hands. "This got triggered in the last hour or so," he said. "Somebody started this remotely." "So, somebody set it off while Wade was down here," I said. "Looks like it." And right there is where the floor started sliding out from under me, even though I hadn't moved an inch. Somebody knew Wade would be in my cellar that afternoon. Somebody waited until he was standing right next to that shelving and then hit a button to play Breathing through a speaker. Breathing built to make a contractor text his customer in a panic. Built to make that customer call the cops. Built to put 2 patrol units in a hidden room in my house. This wasn't some prank. This was a piece of clockwork, and every gear had been wound by hand. The receipt turned up 2 days later. I can't tell you the exact moment I stopped being the homeowner and started being the suspect, but it happened the way bad things tend to. Quiet, without a single dramatic minute. One day a patrolman's asking me routine questions. The next there's a detective named Maddox sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad asking me real friendly whether I'd ever rented a unit at a storage place out on Sheridan Road. I hadn't, except according to their paperwork, I had. Twice. Paid cash both times. My name on the contract in my own handwriting, far as anybody could tell. And when they cut the lock on that storage unit, they found a suitcase of women's clothes, a prepaid debit card tied to a bank account with my name on it, and a photograph. A woman I had never laid eyes on. 40s maybe, reddish hair, grinning at whoever held the camera like the world was a fine place to be. Detective Buxned, watching my face the whole time. This woman was reported missing 19 days ago. Her name's Bianca Foss. You want to tell me how you know her? I don't, I said. I've never seen her in my life. And that was the gospel truth, every word of it. But here's the part that cracked something open in my chest, and I didn't say it to the detective, because I needed to be by myself when I figured out what it meant. That night, after he left, I went into our bedroom and over to the little cedar box on Sylvia's dresser where she keeps her recipe cards. The ones from her mother, the ones she'd never let me throw out even though she had every one of them memorized. I don't know what made me look there. I flipped through them one at a time, and tucked behind the card for her mother's cornbread, folded once, was a small photograph. Bianca Foss, smiling. I sat down on the edge of the bed I'd shared with that woman for 19 years, in the house that all of a sudden didn't feel like mine, holding a picture of a missing stranger that my wife had hidden where she made supper. And I thought about all of it, every Thanksgiving, every trip to Branson, every Sunday morning with the gospel radio and the black coffee, half a packet of sweetener, not a care in the world. How long had that photo been behind the cornbread card? How long had my wife been building this thing while I sat 10 feet away fixing somebody's carburetor? At 64, I figured the worst thing that could happen to a man was his ticker giving out, or his mind going soft. Turns out the worst thing is realizing the person sleeping next to you for 2 decades was never really there. She was always somewhere else, working. If this is hitting home and you want more stories like it, do me that favor and hit like and subscribe. It genuinely keeps this going. Thank you. Sincerely. Now, here's the thing nobody warns you about getting framed by your own wife. The hard part isn't the evidence stacking up against you. The hard part is understanding she was never confused, never going through a rough patch, never lost. Every soft moment, every tear, every I love you, you old fool, all of it was on schedule. Let me back up. Sylvia came home from Wichita 3 days after the cellar. I'd told her on the phone that something strange had happened and she needed to get back, nothing more. When she walked in, she did everything a worried wife is supposed to do. Hands on my face, eyes welling up. "Howard, honey, what in the world happened? Are you all right?" And God help me, for about an hour I bought it clean. She cried when I showed her the cellar. She held onto my arm while I explained the locks and the speaker and that little cracked phone. She said all the right things. "That's horrifying. Who would do something like this?" "Howard, do we need to call a lawyer?" That last one. "Do we need to call a lawyer?" I thought she was looking out for me. I know now she was just being careful. The storage unit cracked her act, but only for a half a second. When Detective Maddox came back 4 days later and laid the Sheridan Road business out in front of both of us, I happened to be watching her face. Most folks wouldn't have caught it. It lasted no longer than a blink. A tiny little freeze, like a TV picture hanging for an instant before it catches back up. Then the tears came right on time. Somebody's setting my husband up, she said, real firm, reaching for my hand across the table. This is obviously a frame job. Howard has never been near that storage place. Maddox looked at her a good long moment. Mrs. Kessler, he said, how is it obvious to you? She didn't even pause. Because I know my husband. I have turned that sentence over in my head about 400 times since. She didn't say he'd never do such a thing. She didn't say it was impossible. She said she knew me. Kept the whole thing aimed at how sure she was, never at the kind of man I am. It was a lawyer's answer wearing a wife's voice. This is where it started getting complicated, so stay with me. I've got a buddy named Mitch. Known him since we were 20, played slow-pitch softball together for years. Mitch spent his whole working life in insurance. Fraud investigation, claims that didn't add up. He's made a living out of figuring how a person builds a lie that holds its shape. I called him the seventh night after Sylvia had gone to bed, and I told him everything. He was quiet a real long time. Then he said, Howard, how many accounts do you two have together? 4, I told him. Checking, savings, the credit card, and a home equity line we took out years ago to redo the kitchen. Who handles them? I opened my mouth and shut it again. Sylvia handled them. Had since maybe the second year we were married, back when I'd griped one time about how much I hated sitting down with the bills, and she'd offered to take it over. I never thought about it again after that. Why would I? The bills got paid, the savings grew a little every year. Everything ran smooth. Pull every statement you can get your hands on, Mitch said. Go back at least 5 years. I pulled 7. What I found didn't jump out and grip me by the collar. That was the whole genius of it. There wasn't one big ugly withdrawal, no wire transfer to some island. There were little things. $150 routed off to an account I didn't recognize. A monthly charge to a business name I'd never heard of. A cash withdrawal every few months, always under the limit that makes a bank file a report. I learned later that line is $10,000, and she never came anywhere close to tripping it. She kept it small. Small and patient and steady. Over 7 years, it added up to a hair over $71,000. 71 grand bled out of my own accounts, so slow I never heard a drop hit the floor. I sat at my workbench out in the garage at 2 in the morning staring at those printouts, and I felt a kind of cold I don't have a good word for. Not scared cold, the cold of sighs. Because this wasn't something my wife cooked up after a bad year. The very first odd transaction was dated 13 months after our wedding. She started skimming when we were still picking out curtains. Mitch drove over the next morning. We laid it all out on the dining room table. Bank records, the storage paperwork, the police report, a timeline I'd scratched out on a yellow pad at 3 a.m. He studied it without saying anything for a while, which is how Mitch shows respect when he's looking at something worse than you realize. The storage rental, he finally said. Walk me through where your phone was the night before that contract got signed. On the nightstand, I said. I always charge it on the nightstand. And where was your wife? In bed. Same room. Same bed, 19 years. Mitch nodded slow. She took your phone while you slept. Drove out there, signed your name. You think she doesn't know your signature by heart after 22 years? I thought about the morning after. Was she tired? Off? I couldn't tell you, because every morning ran the same. I'm up before her, coffee, out to the garage. I never looked back. The contractor, Mitch said. You called the foundation outfit yourself? Off my cell, yeah. Pull your outgoing calls for that morning. I already knew what I'd find before I found it. Some part of me had known since the second Wade texted me from that cellar. I just hadn't been ready to look straight at it. The call to Tomlin Foundation went out from my number at 10:42 in the morning. By 10:42 that morning, I was at the VFW hall helping set up chairs for a luncheon, and there were a dozen old men who could swear to it. My wife made that call. From my phone, which she'd lifted again to bring out a contractor she knew would climb into that cellar, find the shelving, find the door, hear the breathing, and set the whole thing rolling while I ate a sandwich and watched the ballgame. She'd built the entire first act. The crack in the cellar seal. Mitch figures she'd worked it loose herself over time, or helped the weather along. The hidden door, painted to vanish, sitting there who knows how long. The speaker, the cheap phone, the timing of the trigger. She'd been 2 hours away in Wichita, sitting at supper with her friend, and tapped a button on her phone to start the machine running. Howard, Mitch said, and his voice dropped down to the register a man uses when he wishes he didn't have to say a thing. A plan like this doesn't come together in a few months. The money goes back 7 years. Your name on accounts you never opened, Your handwriting where you never wrote. That takes practice. She didn't just study you, partner. He stopped. She memorized you. I got up and went to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The garden Sylvia put in 2 springs back. I'd hauled the topsoil and run the soaker hose every evening that summer, because she said the new plants needed somebody steady. I'd watered her garden while she was digging my grave. At 64, I had exactly one move left, and I hadn't said a word about it to Mitch yet. I hadn't said it to anybody, because the only way it worked was if my wife believed all the way down that she'd won. She had to stay comfortable. She had to keep thinking the smartest one in this house was her. There's a particular quiet that comes over a man when he stops being afraid and turns into something else. I found that quiet at the kitchen table on a Thursday, with cold coffee and 7 years of bank statements, and I made up my mind about a few things I have not lost 1 minute of sleep over since. I did not call a lawyer. I did not have it out with my wife. I did not march back to Detective Maddox with what Mitch and I had dug up. Because here's the trouble with evidence. It only works if the one handing it over has any credibility, and right then, in the eyes of the Tulsa police, I was a 64-year-old man with his name on a storage unit full of a missing woman's belongings. My word wasn't worth much. Sylvia had thought of that too. Of course she had. So I did the one thing she hadn't planned for. I turned into somebody she couldn't read. First I called my brother. Wendell's 2 years older than me, retired Marine, lives up in Joplin, Missouri. He's the kind of man who owns more rifles than chairs, speaks in about 6 words at a stretch, and has never panicked over anything in his life, including the time his truck caught fire on the interstate. I drove up to Joplin on a Saturday, told my wife I needed a couple days to get my head straight, and watched her face fold itself into the perfect picture of a supportive woman. "Take whatever time you need, sweetheart," she said. I damn near smiled. At my brother's kitchen table, over burnt coffee and a plate of leftover biscuits, I laid all of it out. The cellar, the storage unit, the money, the phone records, the photograph behind the cornbread card. Wendell listened without cutting in one time, which for him is the equivalent of any other man jumping up and hollering. When I finished, he sat still a while. "You said she's got somebody she talks to," he said. "Somebody she trusts." "Her friend, Joelle. They've been thick as thieves since before Sylvia and I ever met. Talk every week, sometimes more via phone or in person. Both. Joelle's up in Wichita, visits a handful of times a year. And they do these long phone calls, 2-3 hours. Sylvia always takes those out in the sunroom with the door shut." Wendell nodded, slow. "How long ago did you put a baby monitor out in that sunroom?" I looked at him. "Wendell, I haven't." "I know you haven't," he said. "But you're about to. Let me be plain about something. I am not a vengeful man. I coached Little League for 9 years. I have never thrown a punch outside of a gym in my life. At a cookout, I'm the fella making sure everybody's got a cold drink and the vegetarians got something besides coleslaw to eat. Getting even is not how I'm built. But I am a patient man, and patience, it turns out, is the only thing that matters in a long game. Wendell ordered the monitor online and paid cash for it at a shipping store counter, sent it to a box, the kind of careful a man learns in the service and never unlearns. I drove home Sunday, told Sylvia I felt a lot better, let her hug me in the doorway, and counted her heartbeats against my chest while I felt absolutely nothing at all. That was the strangest part. Not rage, not grief, just a clean, flat quiet. I set the monitor up on a Sunday afternoon while she was at the grocery store. Little wireless thing tucked it behind the philodendron on the sunroom windowsill, a plant I had not moved one time in all the years we'd lived there, and neither had she. Took me 4 minutes. That evening I drove back up toward Wendell's, met him halfway, and we made sure the audio came through clean on his laptop. Then I came home for supper. Sylvia made meatloaf, asked if I was feeling more like myself. "Getting there," I said. She smiled and topped off my iced tea. I waited 22 days. 22 days of being Howard Kessler, loving husband, cooperative homeowner, polite person of interest in a Miss Herson's case. 22 days of answering Maddox's questions nice and easy, of letting my wife hold my hand right in front of him, of watching her play the worried spouse so well that even I had moments, short, sickening moments, of wondering whether I'd dreamed the whole thing up out of grief. Then, on a Thursday evening in the 4th week, Joelle came down from Wichita to visit. I made myself scarce, told Sylvia I was running over to Mitch's to watch the game, kissed her on the cheek, and drove exactly 3 blocks before I parked under a dead streetlight and opened my phone. The audio was clear as a bell. They talked 20 minutes about nothing. Joelle's bad hip, a wedding coming up, a barbecue place near Wichita worth the drive. I nearly talked myself into believing I'd lost my mind, that I'd hidden a listening device in my own sunroom over heartbreak and a bunch of insurance fraud hunches from Mitch. Then my wife's voice changed. It was a small thing, like a singer slipping from one key into another. Same voice, same throat, everything else different. She went quieter. The warmth ran right out of it, smooth and complete, the way water leaves a tub. "He doesn't suspect a thing," my wife said. Joelle was quiet a second. "You're sure? You said the detective's been by." "He has. And Howard just keeps making me coffee in the morning and asking if I want the trash taken out. Maddox treats him like a suspect, and he just sits there, being Howard Howell. He can't see past the end of his own nose. Never could. And the woman? Bianca?" "Tucked away," my wife said. "She agreed to 45 more days. She's down in Galveston. I paid her enough she's not going to open her mouth, and by the time her time's up, Howard'll be in too deep to climb out." A long pause. "Sylvia." Joelle's voice had gone careful. "What actually happens to him at the end?" "He turns into the answer to a question the police have already been asking," my wife said, easy as ordering off a menu. "They've got his name, his handwriting, his money trail. I just have to leave it alone and let it set up like concrete. Another few weeks and it doesn't even need me anymore. It runs on its own. And where are you when that happens?" "Somewhere I can see the water," she said. And then she laughed. A real laugh, loose and pleased, the laugh of somebody whose work has come out exactly the way they drew it up. I sat in my truck 3 blocks from my own house, listening to my wife laugh about the architecture of my ruin, and that cold quiet came back over me and settled in for good. I did not call my brother. I did not call Mitch. I did not call Detective Maddox. Not yet. I want to tell you about Bianca Foss because she matters in this. 2 days after Joelle's visit, I hired a private investigator named Owen Castellano, retired Tulsa PD, 26 years on the job, recommended by Mitch. Owen's the kind of man whose whole personality is a manila folder. I gave him one job: find Bianca Foss. It took him 5 days. She was in Galveston, Texas, just like my wife said, in a beachfront motel paying cash, signed in under a name a couple letters off her own. Owen got photographed, got her talking, and got a notarized statement out of a woman who, it turned out, had not entirely understood what she'd signed up for, and was a whole lot less comfortable with it now that a retired detective was sitting across from her, explaining what the word accessory means in a court of law. Bianca Foss wasn't a criminal. She was a woman behind on her bills who made one catastrophic decision. My wife had found her through a debt relief outfit, paid her to vanish for 60 days, and let everybody believe she'd come to harm. Bianca gave Owen all of it: how she'd been recruited, what she'd been paid, the script my wife coached her on. She signed her statement with her hand shaking and cried for a good 10 minutes, and Owen sat there with her until she was done. Because under all that manila folder, the man's got a decent heart. So now I had the recording from the sunroom and a sworn statement from a missing woman who wasn't missing. 2 things my wife had no idea existed. Here's what I did not do. I did not walk into the police station and dump it all on Maddox's desk. Because evidence handed over by the suspect, even evidence that clears him, turns into a process, a slow, grinding, public process where my wife would lawyer up, go silent, and spend the next 18 months pulling apart everything I'd built from the safety of a courtroom. She was good at pulling things apart. I'd learned that much. So I did something simpler. On a Friday night, while my wife sat out in the sunroom with one of those true crime paperbacks she loved. The gall of that woman. I sat at the kitchen table and sent 2 things. From an email she'd never seen, to a phone number she didn't have saved, an audio file of her own voice, and a photo of Bianca Foss standing on a beach holding up that morning's newspaper, alive as you please. No message, no name, nothing. I closed the laptop, rinsed my coffee mug, and went to bed. She came in about 40 minutes later. I watched through my lashes as she stood in the bedroom doorway, phone in her hand, dead still. In 19 years, I had never once seen my wife stand completely still. She was always doing something, straightening, wiping, managing. She stood in that doorway like a woman who'd just heard a noise in the dark and couldn't find where it came from. Good. The next morning, I drove down to the police station and set Owen Castellano's full report on Detective Maddox's desk. The statement, the photographs, the bank records, the phone logs, all of it in a navy folder with a metal clasp, because if I'm going to do a thing, I'm going to do it right. Maddox read for the better part of 15 minutes without lifting his head. "Mr. Kessler," he finally said. "I think we both know I never rented that unit," I said. He looked at me a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. They arrested my wife on a Tuesday. 16 counts, conspiracy, fraud, filing a false report, identity theft. They walked her out our own front door in cuffs on a cold gray morning, the kind where you can see your own breath. I stood on the porch and watched. She looked back at me one time, just the once, as they walked her toward the car. And for the first time in 22 years, I couldn't read her face. Couldn't find the math going on behind her eyes. Couldn't find the woman who'd traced my signature like a forger over a window. She just looked at me. I gave her a nod, because here's what my wife never figured out. The one flaw sitting right in the middle of her perfect plan. She'd spent years watching what I did. Where I went, how I slept, how I signed my name, how I'd never once think to check the recipe cards. She studied every single thing I did. She never paid 1 minute of attention to what I was thinking. Joelle was charged too, a few weeks later, up in Kansas. She'd known the whole thing start to finish and helped move some of the money. Bianca Foss took a deal in exchange for her testimony and a whole lot of community service, and from what I hear, she's back to waiting tables and counting herself lucky, which she is. At 64 years old, I am not a dramatic man. I don't make speeches. I don't slam doors. I don't need to get the last word in. I just needed the last move. She spent 19 years building a cage for me. I built hers in about 3 weeks. She'd traced my signature 1,000 times. She never once bothered to read my mind, and that was always going to be the only mistake that mattered. Somewhere down the road, when she's out, my wife is going to spend the rest of her days glancing over her shoulder for a man she thought she had measured to the inch. She knew my habits. She never knew my spine. If this one got you, do me that favor, hit like, hit subscribe, and stick around, because there's plenty more where this came from. Thanks for sitting with me. I'll see you on the next one, right here at Dad's Bold Revenge.